Good. Okay, so welcome to everyone and thank you for joining us. I'm Becky, I'm the Chief Exec of the English Association and I'm really pleased to be here with you this afternoon. I'm just going to give you a few words about the English Association. We are a learned society and a subject association that was founded in 1906 to promote, support and celebrate the discipline of English studies. We cover all stages of education from primary and early years through to secondary and further education to higher education and beyond. And we also cover all parts of the discipline across language, literature, linguistics and creative writing. Events like this one are made possible by the fantastic contribution of our volunteer speakers. So thank you so much to Cate for giving us your time so generously today. Our members also make it possible for us to keep these events free and open to all by paying their membership fees. So if you would like to contribute to the national conversation about English and help support our discipline, please do consider joining us. It costs just £55 to support our events and campaigning work for a whole year, and you get access to a range of member benefits, including online access to all our journals. Right, that was the bump. Now for the good stuff. Okay, so it is my pleasure to be here to think about the role of songs in supporting young learners' oral language development. And here to share her expertise with us is Cate Hamilton. So Cate has taught English and French at a secondary level, and she also co-founded the multilingual music group Babble Babies in 2011. Most excitingly, Cate has just completed her doctoral research and passed her viva successfully on Friday. So we now must congratulate Dr. Cate Hamilton, which is a great joy. So Cate is, as you will see, comes through in this presentation, is really passionate about evidence-based practice and thinking about the best ways to support teachers in their own practice by putting together high quality research to help support those decisions. Right, Cate, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Becky. Thanks for having me. It's lovely to be here. And hello to everybody online. I can't see you, but give you a little wave. So I'm a teacher, as Becky said. I was a secondary English and French teacher, and I've kind of gone on a bit of a journey into research over the last few years, and it's grown out of my practice as a teacher. So I'm going to tell you a bit about my research journey and how that began in my practice, and it's all about whether or not songs are a useful way to help children learn languages. So the plan for today is I'll tell you a bit about my practice and then how my research agenda, if you like, developed. So I started out looking at how teachers use songs. Then I reviewed what evidence do we have that would support teachers in those choices of songs as a pedagogy. And then I've just run an intervention study as part of my doctorate. And I've got some implications of that that we can hopefully take back into the classroom. And then hopefully there'll be time for some questions as well at the end. And love to have a discussion with you. So I was a secondary French and English teacher, but actually my kind of journey with songs really started when I set up an early years singing group. And this was because I had a baby and I wanted to introduce him to French. And I felt a bit weird talking to him in French in the supermarket in Glasgow. So I needed an excuse, if you like. So I started singing songs with him, and at the same time my friend had a baby and she can do German. So we did a mixture of different languages and eventually created Babel Babies, which was a sort of a multilingual children's languages adventure where we discovered different languages through music and different sort of traditional songs. So here's a little bit of a visual sort of tour of it. So this is me and Ruth in the top left here. So we are the co-founders, and eventually over 10 years I grew the kind of concept to be a business with 10 different teachers, and we went into preschools as well as inviting parents and children to come along and do that sort of circle time singing group with the songs all in different languages. I actually started to get more into preschools and then was invited into primary schools to come and teach languages. And it was a really multi-sensory, multilingual group. So the songs are in 10 different languages. So French, German, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, Russian, Norwegian, Arabic, Welsh, as well as English. And it was really great fun. And anecdotally, it looked like it was really effective. And that, you know, I even had like 2 and 3-year-olds singing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star in lots of different languages. Everybody had felt great. Parents would say, you know, they were a GP and they'd always been terrible at languages, but this seemed to be like The Cure, and they were now singing Portuguese every day to their babies. And so we've got a couple of albums. We were on, on Spotify, and it was about singing languages together. And as I was going into more preschool settings, sometimes attached to primary schools, it felt like I really wanted to be able to say what the evidence was that singing languages together was a good thing to do. And I never met any kind of resistance to the idea. There was just a general enthusiasm that this was the perfect thing to do with young children. And of course, it was a good way to teach primary children because everybody remembers Frère Jacques. And I felt like, I could maybe do a bit more searching and come up with a bit more evidence than everybody remembers Frère Jacques, because a lot of the adults said they remembered it, but they didn't know what the words meant. So I was a bit sort of concerned that, am I actually teaching the language, or are we just teaching a bit of singing? So just to give you a little bit of an idea, we would sing things like The Wheels on the Bus, but we've got this in German, and so we would make connections between English, which was the language of the context, but also the language we were learning. So that was a kind of a translated version of a really kind of popular English tune. But then also we've got some traditional tunes. So C'est la petite bête is a French tickling song, and it was kind of a really multi-sensory experience. We also introduced different alphabets as well, and different things like, so Arabic and Norwegian here. We've got Insi Winsi Spider, or Insi Winsi Ankerboot, and Hoder Skulder Kne og Tor, which is Norwegian. And it was just an interesting kind of linguistic experiment, if you like, to see, like, children, as they got older, they were like, oh, I know this, I can spot the connections. And so it felt like we were doing more linguistics for young children than we were actually trying to teach them 10 different languages. It was a bit more of a kind of a discovery process. And yeah, so as I got more into that, I wanted to know, as I said, is there more evidence behind this kind of process? I met with kind of universal enthusiasm about it. So that was me, my close colleagues, and then, kind of people I worked with. And I came into the research world because I wanted to know, is it actually effective? How do we know that this is, a valuable choice for teaching languages? And I just kept drawing a blank. So I came to Oxford and I did a master's in applied linguistics. And this was at the beginning of COVID. So my initial plan had been to go into classrooms and do a kind of a what works test of different pedagogies compared to each other, but I couldn't do that. So what I ended up doing, and actually set up a really nice research kind of process, was talk to teachers, kind of widening the net, if you like, outside of my circle of colleagues, to see, is this pedagogy something that we believe in, and how do we use it? What do we do with songs, and why do we do it? And it was a survey and interviews that I ran with 103 teachers, and these were teachers from early years up to the end of primary school who responded to the survey. And I just asked them lots of questions about how and why do they use songs. And then I had some follow-up interviews with teachers across the different ages and stages in that early to sort of end of Key Stage 2. And it's not a surprise to you, and it wasn't really a surprise to me either, that teachers use songs all the time in early education. So they're part of the fabric. And I've got fabric in quotes there because one of the early years teachers said they're just woven in to everything. It's part of the fabric of what we do. And in early years, foundation stage, we've got songs, sort of bookending the day, the welcome in the morning song. We've got them as part of just the routines and the rituals, if you like. But they're also used as a standalone activity. So we're going to sing a song, and that is, just the activity that we're doing, as well as being incorporated into other things that you might do, like the tidying up song or the lining up song. And as I looked at the responses from teachers further up in Key Stage 1 and 2, we maybe use songs a bit less frequently, but to introduce topics, to maybe round off a topic, like doing a song about the Vikings, for example, if you've been learning about the Vikings, and also for signalling transitions in a kind of a gentle way. So that was the first paper that I wrote with Victoria Murphy, my supervisor. And like one of the key findings was this idea of the frequency of how much teachers are using songs. So this is a graph showing that the age groups of the children, so from age 2 up to age 11, And here we've got the percentage of the respondents on the survey, like how often they use songs. And this is the teachers who use songs every day or more than once a day. So 80% of respondents in the early years use them every day or more than once a day. And then we go down to 50% in Key Stage 1. And then it goes right down to 10% of teachers in Key Stage 2. So there's this real kind of dramatic tailing off of the frequency of how much we use songs. And there's a lot less singing after age 7. But bucking that trend was the Key Stage 2 languages teachers. So this is the modern foreign languages teachers who were reporting things like saying, words just go in your head without thinking about it when you learn through a song. And they reported using singing and songs a lot more like the early years colleagues that I'd spoken to. So there were the hello and the goodbye songs, but in French or German. And then, there would be songs for introducing topics, vocabulary, and just sort of all of the potential uses that we might have seen in the early years foundation stage seem to get used a lot in Key Stage 2 languages lessons. And that's kind of idiosyncratic. It's different to what's happening in the rest of Key Stage 2, where teachers would say things like, sometimes I look up a song at lunchtime because I can see the kids have got bored of writing and I want to give them something fun. But it's still on the topic of Vikings, but, it's a different thing, and it will re-energize them. And then focus them back in on the real work, if you like, which is, writing or something different to do with literacy. So there seemed to be sort of a really strong link between songs and language education all the way through primary school, and it seemed to go against the trend. But obviously my survey and interviews, that was quite a small selection of people. There was a bigger survey, which is an international survey by Sue Garton and colleagues, and they found that across nearly 5,000 teachers that answered their survey, 67% of those teachers, and they were English teachers, so it could have been English as a foreign or a second language teachers, they were using songs every lesson or frequently, 67% of their respondents, and only 42% were using stories frequently. And that's kind of interesting because it seems that songs are sort of very, very popular. So we know it's a really valued teaching practice, but that hadn't really helped me answer the question of whether we have got research evidence that supports us as teachers to make these choices. So having a look across the literature, starting out with my part of the research is about foreign languages, but the curriculum is a little bit vague, as you might know if you're a primary teacher. So in the Key Stage, in the national curriculum, it just says that children should make substantial progress for a start in the foreign language, and that songs might be helpful for exploring the patterns and the sounds of language, and songs are part of appreciating sort of the culture as well. And that doesn't sound like rocket science, really, does it? We kind of think this sounds intuitive, and it seems like a very natural part of language learning. So, looking at the literature that's cited in this, there's nothing in the national curriculum, but there is a little video that goes along with it from a head teacher who says songs are very powerful in learning a new language because the children really enjoy them and it sticks in their minds. So again, we've got this idea that it's just a powerful thing to do. It's going to stick in your head. And we saw that earlier as well with adults saying they remember Frere Jacques. But I still wanted to know, what's our evidence base? And we could look at this topic. It's a really massive topic from different types of research, like linguistics research or cognitive sciences, like how does it work in your brain, and neuroscience. We could look at psychological things like, motivation, etc. But I'm interested in the pedagogy. So like, what is the evidence supporting teachers to choose songs for meeting particular academic kind of outcomes? And I was mostly interested in the actual language development. So, not whether the children are having a nice time or having fun or feeling motivated, but like, are they actually learning the vocabulary that we think they're learning if we're teaching them a song for the purpose of learning vocabulary specifically? And then I've mentioned this idea of songs getting stuck in your head, and there's kind of a bit of a research myth, if you like, called the Mozart effect, which you might have heard about. It was talked a lot about in the press, actually, in the 90s and 2000s. But that is up here in this cognitive research. We've got this thing, it's called a far transfer effect. So it's like if you learn music, you'll get better at maths, or you'll get better at chess, which is completely unrelated to music. It'll make you better at spatial awareness or something. So it's far transfer because it goes from one domain into another. And actually, there's been a few studies looking at all of the evidence that might be kind of pertinent to that, and finding that if you control for the quality of the studies, like can you reliably trust what the studies say, any effect of music help making you better at chess or maths just disappears. Okay, so the studies are not good enough quality to kind of support those conclusions, but that doesn't stop it from being a really prevalent kind of cultural belief. And people still play, Mozart to their babies and things, which is not to say that's a bad idea, but it's just that it might not have the direct outcomes that you expect from what you might read in the newspapers, for example. So I wanted to know, is it all just kind of, a bit of fun and, the kind of Frère Jacques effect, as I've called it affectionately, that yes, you know the song, but you've got no idea what you're saying. And if the children are just having fun, does that mean something worthwhile and directly educational, like an outcome we might be counting on to happen? Is that happening? Or would we, be better saving songs for doing sort of fun things, but actually the real language learning happens in, in a different way? And I would like to know the answer to that question. And I've got a little quote there from Rickson, which kind of stayed with me as I did all my research. And another one as well from Gleitman that, just because it's self-evident and we have this intuition or we've got this assumption that this is an obvious thing, that of course this works, because you can trace back the use of singing in language education back to the Middle Ages when we sang Latin in the sort of song schools attached to monasteries, and the children all learned how to become a monk through the use of singing. And even Chaucer talks about singing in singing the Alma Redemptoris, which is a song for the Virgin Mary. And then the younger pupil says, what are we singing about? And the older pupil says, I've got no idea, it's about the Virgin Mary, but I just sing it, I don't know what it means. So, it goes back a long way. But have we always had this Frère Jacques effect? Can we make an assumption that it's worthwhile? We should probably do some serious study about it and just check that it is doing. Because if it's not, and given how much sort of squeezing out there is of languages in the curriculum, it's very difficult to sort of say that it's the best use of our time if we've got a particular objective, if we don't have the evidence. So I'll give you a quick tour of what the research literature looked like. And this is specifically classroom studies that are looking at using songs compared to other types of things you might do in classrooms for helping children learn languages. So there's a study saying that there's multiple pedagogical benefits, and I looked at what was being cited as proof, if you like, of those multiple pedagogical benefits. And essentially there were a couple of papers which are like a long list of all the things teachers might like to do with songs, but there wasn't any kind of empirical evidence about it. It was just more of an opinion piece. And I was already of the opinion that songs are useful for lots of different things, but I wanted to know, did we have the evidence to support those choices? So that was a bit of a blank to start with. So I thought, right, I better do a bit more digging. So I looked up all of the evidence reviews that I could find, which is where somebody's taken all the existing research evidence and they've kind of collated it in a review to say what is the overall knowledge we have on this topic. And there's one that's been cited a lot by Davis. He only found 9 studies across 8 countries, which I thought was a really small number of studies given how many teachers might have a interest in this topic. And actually in those 9 studies, only 2 of them really looked at singing as a variable. Sometimes singing gets lumped in with like games and puppets and loads of fun stuff. And then you can't say that if there is an effect noticed, it was the singing that was responsible because it's been muddled up with all sorts of other stuff. And also there were some other reviews which had found a few more studies, but there wasn't anything very conclusive because they didn't control for how kind of reliable the studies were. So you have to be careful to say whether a claim from a study is actually backed up by the methods. Has it been conducted in a way that means that you can rely on the findings? So the first step of my PhD then was to actually do a really deep and systematic review of the literature. And I found 60 studies, which is a lot more than 9, so that was a good start. And And these were published across 4 decades. So found the earliest one was in 1978. And there were 23 different countries that have produced research on this topic. And overall, in a nutshell, there's the link to the paper there, but only 3 out of those 60 studies had found an effect that you could say was reliable or trustworthy, because they'd controlled for all of the important things, like, the children getting older or different starting points. Because as we know, children, they're going to have different outcomes if they're starting from different beginnings. So we need to control for that baseline. Some of these studies didn't have research questions even. So, it was very difficult to sort of conclude anything reliable from them. And sometimes the, sort of methodology wasn't very sort of strong in terms of the design. If you want to study whether, songs compared to another type of teaching is better, you've got to do a very strict research design in order to be able to make that kind of causal link or that conclusion. And a lot of the research didn't do that, but it still made the causal conclusions. So it was a bit unreliable, really. So this, if you like, this picture is a picture of the literature as I found it at that point. So all of these dots represent a different type of language learning outcome. So we've got grammar, vocabulary, which is what children understand if they hear it, and then also productive vocabulary, which is what they can produce themselves. And then speaking, listening, reading, and writing, which are kind of foreign language skills. And if you look across this way, so in this column here, we've got the research found an advantage for singing or the songs over what they were being compared to. In the middle, there wasn't any real sort of advantage for singing compared to the other thing. That could have been stories in a couple of them. And then here we've got that there was no advantage for singing. It was an advantage for the other thing, or the alternative. And as you can see, there's a bit of a kind of dominance of singing or songs having an advantage over the thing that was being compared to. But as you go up the levels, okay, so at the top, these are the studies that we would say are reliable, okay, in that you can trust the conclusions. But at the bottom, we've got studies which are a bit more limited, okay. So there's a bit of a bias towards studies that are not particularly reliable finding a really, big effect of singing compared to the comparative, so like stories or some other teaching. And therefore, the picture was a bit unclear when I'd done that systematic review. We need to be careful, as I said, in research. It's like, you slowly unpick the knitting and you've got to see, exactly what's happening. And here we've got a bit of a bias. If a study was not particularly well controlled, it was more likely to find an advantage of singing. But that didn't really help us answer the question. Like, we really want to know, don't we, as teachers, is the thing I'm doing with my class actually going to have this effect or not? Because if it's not, then I might choose to do something different. Okay, so at this point in my research, I kind of found that songs are a really strong folk pedagogy, by which we mean it gets passed on. People pass songs around, they say, oh yeah, you should have a go at this, or this has worked in my class, it might work in yours. But we had a lack of really sort of valid or reliable studies that would underpin that practice, so teachers wouldn't have been able to draw on sensible evidence. And even if we want to be evidence-based, the evidence has to be there for us to be evidence-based in the first place. And so, it could be that, this is a bit dramatic, so apologies, but it could have just been transmitting, these self-perpetuating, unsupported beliefs and prejudices. We wouldn't want to be in that situation. We would like to untangle what was happening. So the next step then was to run a study and to try and do something which was quite controlled. And also, before even embarking on that, just think, why do we imagine, or what's a theory, if you like, of why songs might support language learning? And as I mentioned earlier, there's that kind of like Mozart effect thing, which has been shown is not a really very reliable theory. But there is a reliable theory. It's called the prosodic bootstrapping hypothesis. So babies, we know, they process the rhythm or the prosody of language before they start tuning into the details or the pitch. So you imagine you're on the train and you hear a family talking across the aisle. that they're speaking language. You might not understand which language it is or what they're saying. So I don't speak Polish, for example. If I hear people speaking Polish, I know they're speaking and that it's a language, but then I don't tune into the details because I don't speak Polish. Whereas if I hear people speaking French, I can tune in and I can get meaning out of what they're saying. Okay, so with babies, if you take away the prosody of language, they don't process. Their brain just says, that's just a noise. They don't hear that that is language. So we know prosody is really, really important. And it's kind of supportive of, babies. If you hear a language you don't understand, it just sounds like one long stream of noise. And you need to break up what you can hear into parts. Okay, so you don't know where the beginning and the ends of words are when you hear it orally because you can't see the gaps. Whereas here on the page, you can see where the spaces are. So that's the advantage of having a written text. But anyway, so we've got this idea that prosody might help us. And then I wanted to see, okay, if you add melody in as well, does that have a more facilitative effect? So there was a study that I found, one of the very few really reliable studies, where they'd got Polish children in Poland learning English, and they were about age 8 to 9, and they had a nursery rhyme group and a story group, and then they compared them to a group who were just doing the normal English lessons. And they did a test called an elicited imitation, so the children would hear a sentence and they'd have to repeat it. And this is something I thought I could build on. So I thought I could add in a melody, like a song condition as well. So I'd have a song and then, the rhythm, the poetry group compared to stories, and just see, is there any difference between just doing a poem or a nursery rhyme compared to actually doing a song with a tune. So I came up with a research question, and I was essentially comparing songs and chants and stories, because those are three things that we might do in languages classroom. I also had a group who I taught French as well. I'll tell you a bit more about that. They were a control group that's called the business as usual control, and they did not get songs, chants or stories. They got something else, which I'll show you about. And I wanted to compare them to each other as well as to this control group. So are any of those methods of teaching, songs, chants or stories, different to each other? And do they have any difference to the control group? And I've got two brilliant schools. So in the southwest, I've got 96 children in year 3. So they're 7 to 8 years old. And they hadn't done any French yet. So this was their first experience of French. And I did a really strict experimental design. It's called a repeated measures design, because I got 3 data points. And I randomly allocated the children to the different groups, which is basically what you might call the gold standard of experimental design, because then all of the noise in the data is just distributed by chance across the group. So you haven't got, any advantage of their teachers, for example. They, if you teach an existing class one method and an existing class another method, it could be that the teachers are different in those classes, so that the groups are already different to begin with. Whereas if you randomly allocate people, which means you just mix up the classes at random, then you can say, oh yeah, it's actually the one thing that you change is the type of teaching method that they got. So if you do find anything, you can more reliably pin it on that thing that you've done with them, which is different. And in my case, that was they either got songs, or they got chants, or they got stories. And then I did the same type of elicited imitation task. So they heard a sentence and they repeated it back. And I taught them for 3 weeks. And it was a small amount of time, so 220 minutes across 11 lessons. But given the kind of input limited context that we have in England for teaching French, this was about 8 weeks of French lessons squeezed into 3 weeks. So it's fairly intensive. And this is what I did with them. So the first group got 24 French songs. The second group got the same thing, but I didn't have the tune. And I'll give you a little sing along in a second, you can hear that. And then the third group, I took the words from the songs and I made up an 11-part story. So this means that all the words were the same, because we know songs are really repetitive. They've got choruses and different things. So you've got to make sure that you control for the fact that the story has to have the same amount of repetition. Otherwise, that could be what's helping. And then the fourth group is the control group, and they had some primary languages network materials. And they looked a bit like this. So this is what the children would have seen in different groups. So the song group had Mon petit lapin a bien du chagrin and 24 other types of songs. And then the rhythm or the chant group, they had Mon petit lapin a bien du chagrin. So it's got the rhythm, but hasn't got the melody. The story was a story about a wee rabbit, un lapin. Okay, so he was going through the forest. He was really worried he was going to get eaten by the wolf, and his friends were trying to sort of cheer him up. And, you know, it had a classic kind of narrative arc and all of the things that would engage you with the story, like characters and, you know, sort of a denouement and all of that. And then the last group was the control group, and we weren't testing the teaching method in this group. They're just there to sort of see if you're doing something where you measure the effects in an experiment, you've got to have a control group who gets something different so that you can sort of divide up, if you like, what the results mean. And so that's what they were doing. But they had a nice French lessons. They heard the same amount of French, but they didn't get the same materials. Okay, so I could then see if there was a difference. And I had to do various different things to sort of get a baseline. So we talked, we looked at their non-verbal IQ and English vocabulary, French vocabulary, and a rhythm task to see if they had been a drummer for 5 years. This might have, you know, like a big impact on their ability to do rhythm, and check what is their language background, you know, and do they already speak French. And then, as I said, we had this elicited imitation. Okay, so I will just show you what the sentences were. So they started out really short. So we had 5 little practices, which were pour nous, so just two syllables. But then, as the real sentences start, there are 22. It goes up to 9 syllables. So we began the real test with 4. So il sort sa tête, and then it goes all the way up to un petit poisson qui tourne en rond, which is really hard. Okay, and these children have never done French before. So within 3 weeks, you know, they've been exposed to all of these sentences through either songs or chants or stories. And then we're looking to see, is there anything different happening across those groups in how well they can repeat it? Because we think if they can repeat it, if it's very short, they might just parrot it back. But as it gets longer, you can't parrot back 9 syllables. So if you can achieve some sort of, you know, improvement, you have to be processing that language. So it's actually quite a nice way of figuring out how much language development's happening, even though they have had very little exposure to French. Like, I couldn't ask them, do you know what this means? That would be too explicit, and they wouldn't, you know, be able to tell me. But if they can hear it and process it and repeat it, that is an indication that, like, oral language development is happening. Okay, so these are these lines on this plot are sort of what we call the descriptive findings. So this is what the data looked like before I did any statistics on it. So we've got the red line is the song group, the blue line is the control group, green is for the stories, and yellow is for the chanting. So you can see all the groups got better at doing this test. But if you have a look at the scale here, it was measured from 0, they couldn't repeat a thing, to 5, they repeated it perfectly. And these are the averages here, okay? So very, very small differences, because it's from 2 to 2.8, okay? So what I've done is I've given you a little slice of that axis from 0 to 5, and you can see they're very close together. Okay, but everybody got better, which was a good thing, because I'd been out of the classroom for a few years. I was worried, had I forgotten how to teach or whatever, but everybody got better at French. If I show you this plot here, this is super statisticky, but basically these things which look a bit like balloons, they're called a violin plot, okay? And this is the beginning. Everybody was very, very similar. Everyone got a little bit better in the immediate post-test as soon as they'd done the lessons. And then everybody got a little bit better again 6 weeks later. Okay, so nobody got worse over that time. Actually, they retained their knowledge. That could just be because they were having the test 3 times. So we have to be careful not to get too excited. But as you can see, there's not a lot of difference between the groups, really. Okay, so there wasn't an immediately obvious songs are much better than all of these other things, okay? That what there is a kind of a comparatively similar sort of bit of progress for the singing and the chanting and the story groups over time. But also for the group who just had a very small amount of French that's quite repetitive, like c'est un chat or c'est un lapin, and they just had different animals, different colours, different numbers. All of these children were exposed to French sounds, okay? Only the three experimental groups, so red and yellow and green, they heard the actual sentences that I was testing them on over time, over those 3 weeks. And the blue group didn't. But actually everybody got better. So, even just some exposure to French helped them get better at noticing French sounds and producing, the sentences they were hearing. So what's interesting here is that there isn't some sort of superlative songs are better than everything else, but also songs are very similarly effective compared to the other methods as well. Now, there isn't some sort of astronomical gain. Everybody didn't go from a 2 to a 5 on the scale. That would be unrealistic to expect because they had 220 minutes of learning some French and it was their first go at it. But it is all looking positive. So if we put my study into that graph, it's up here. So we've got another study about speaking, and not to sort of blow my own trumpet, but it's a fairly reliable study. We've got random allocation and lots of control mechanisms to check, is the effect that we found kind of trustworthy? So now we could see that there isn't in my study evidence of an advantage for singing, but there's certainly no evidence of a disadvantage. It is not kind of like the little bit of throwaway fun. There is language development happening there, and it was sustained over time. And so the implications for the teaching are really interesting, I think, because we can see that singing and chanting and reading stories aloud, they're all effective for helping these 7 and 8-year-olds. They're all beginners at French, so it helps them improve their ability to perceive and notice and then to repeat back the French. And now if a teacher really enjoys singing, they can say, great, because I will do more of that because it's, something I enjoy, and I know now that children are going to be learning the language as they go. It's not just this sort of bit of fun. Also, if a teacher is not keen on singing, it's not that the children will be missing out if they do less of it, okay, because you could prioritize doing stories, and the children all repeated the story, so it wasn't just them looking and listening, they all said the things out loud, okay, so that was kind of reciting the chants, reciting the stories aloud. And this is a process where they have to notice and then they have to actually repeat it, so that all worked really well in all of the groups. And as teachers, we know a mixture of pedagogies is kind of a useful thing, and now we can say on the menu of choices, singing is just as good as these other things. What we haven't got is, any evidence that singing is more effective in this context in the way I presented it for introducing a language to young learners. Now, if you remember, I showed you this slide, the children could see the words. Okay, so it could be that if you took away the words and you had maybe younger children and they were only listening, you might find a different effect there because they had the advantage of that visual support, which other research shows is really helpful in helping children to do this as well. So, my rationale for that was that I don't think in primary school we would have 3 weeks of lessons with no kind of looking at literacy at all. But perhaps in an early years context where children are pre-literate, that would be different. And you might see that purely oral language would have a different sort of a benefit of singing compared to other things. But that's still to be, remains to be seen. That'll be my next research project, hopefully. So singing and reading and chanting aloud all helped with oral language development. And if we find them to be fun and motivating as well, then that is excellent news, I think. So, as I've said, I'm just going to finish off and say that, we can't dismiss singing as a little bit of fun. It's a definite part of the language acquisition, and oral linguistic progress is being made. And we've got lots more exciting research to do. So we need to look at what kind of learners would most benefit, and how much should we do songs, and what kind of songs? Is it songs with actions? What if you only listen to the song or watch YouTube? What if you don't actually sing it? Is that different? So we've got just another kind of list of research questions to go next. So I would love to, this is my references I put in, and Becky's going to share the slides. But that's enough from me, and if you've got any questions, I'd be very happy to chat to you about them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate. We'll just give people a minute or so to sort of let it percolate and think and pop
Yeah,
some questions in the chat if they have them. But I wondered if I could ask you a question.
yeah,
I hope
sure.
that's okay. I haven't told you I'm going to ask you this, so sorry, it just popped into my head while you were speaking. But I wondered if you had identified any difference between the type of language and whether songs were effective. So if it's a language that's in, for example, not the Roman alphabet, does that make a difference?
Mhm.
Or, if it's a sort of a Latinate language as versus a different language, are there any differences there?
Well, that's an interesting question. Yeah. So basically, languages have all got their own kind of prosodic profile, if you like. So you mean an obvious example is Italian. Okay, if you think about the rhythm of Italian compared to the rhythm of French, French is very buh, 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 and everything is sort of similarly weighted, apart from at the end of a sentence. Whereas Italian, has got kind of a very distinctive rhythm, and English, if you know your Shakespeare, has that iambic kind of pentameter, if you like, in the Shakespeare. But we've got different rhythmic properties of languages. So it could be that those children learning English would find a more of a support because the rhythm is already indicative of where the words begin and end. Excuse me. Whereas in French, it's only really the ends of lines that are strongly kind of accentuated, and that could mean it's less salient, which is the word that we use to say it's less noticeable. And then I wouldn't know about languages beyond that. I would have to speculate. But I know that languages have all got, it's called the iambic trochaic law. Okay, it's super fun. But either languages are stress-based or syllable timed. And there's, obviously Japanese as well. We talk about the more in Japanese. Having a different, and we've got tonal languages. Would it work with Mandarin speakers, for example? So there's still lots of questions about that. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was just curious. Thank you. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Um, okay, I can't see anything coming through on the chat, which is fine. So, Kate, do you have anything that you would like to add before we go?
Um, well, I mean, I think just my next step is really to think about sort of children learning English as an additional language and supporting oral language development because it's, the baseline, isn't it, of everything. So that might be sort of the direction to go in, and then to think about if you've got a different context. So those children I studied with were learning French in a place where they don't hear French in the environment at all, so it's a foreign language. Whereas if you're looking at children who are learning English in England, you've got English all around them all the time. So it would be interesting to see, how much of what I found so far can be applied in that kind of context. So if anybody wants to get in touch and talk about these things, I'm very happy to very happy to talk about it or send any papers or anything like that. Just let me know. Thanks so much for having me, Becky.
Oh, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you. Okay, and thank you to everyone who joined us. It's been really good to have you with us, and I hope we will see you at another other event soon. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.